Hello, my name is Rob Garner. I'm a computer programming instructor, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to create forms using C#. I've created a project already. It has a student class in it, which has a couple private fields for the students' scores and the courses they're taking. It has 4 overridden constructors. One is parameterless, one has just a student ID, another one has 4 parameters with some identification information and the major the student's taking, and the last one also includes scores. You'll notice that the last one calls a calc average method, which when the scores are placed in, it will calculate the average property. And you can see the calc average right here. It also has a number of properties, one for major, one for scores, courses, and then first, last name, student number, and average. And we have a toString method which neatly formats all the information for output. And you'll notice that here we do a for next. We look at the number of courses that are available, and it displays the course and the score received in that course. So now we need to create a form to display this information. And we'll start off placing some labels. We have a label for student ID, first name, and last name. In addition to the ID, the name for these labels will set their text property so that they display what we want to display. I can use the alignment tools to align them and distribute them evenly. And I'm going to place some text boxes, extend them so that they have some room for the person to input some information. And I'm going to name my text boxes so that I can find them easily when I write code against them. So here we have some labels and some text boxes. Fairly straightforward. I also want to set the name of my form to form FRM student info and set its text property to student info so that it shows up here in the window. Next thing I want to do is allow the user to select the major for the student, and to do this I'm going to create I'm going to use radio buttons. The thing about radio buttons is that you can only have one selected per container they're in, and it's a good practice, even if you only have radio buttons on a form, to place them in a group box. group box is in the container menu item or toolbox area, and I'm going to name this major and change it to GP major or GB major for group box. And then I'm going to drag in some radio buttons. Each one of these radio buttons will represent each of the different types of majors. I'm going to check. I'm going to set their name and their text property to reflect that. Next thing I'm going to add is some labels over an area where I'm going to collect the courses and scores that the student has. So LBL courses, and change its text property to courses, and scores. And underneath this I'm going to set some checkboxes. We don't really need to place checkboxes in a group box like we do our radio buttons because they can be independently checked off. And I'm also going to set their text properties. So there's the course options, and then to enter the scores I'm going to set some text boxes in place. And actually we wanted 4 because we have 4 possible courses. So now we have our courses and our scores. And we'll drag a button over. And a place, well, first let's name our button btn submit. And it's text property, so it displays a message to the user. And we want a text box to put our results out, which will be just taking that toString value and displaying it when we hit the button. And we're going to set some properties on this text box. We want it to be read-only, and we want it to be multi-line, and we want vertical scroll bars. So here we have our form. And if we were to look at form1.designer, we would see all the code that went into generating the form. You can see that all of our labels and all our text boxes are instantiated. Visual Studio wrote all this code for us, so we didn't need to. And we can see all the properties being set that we set just visually by setting the property window. And then we can see with the form, all of these controls are added to the form. We can see our group box up here. Right there, that's the group box being added. And here we can see where our radio buttons were added to the group box. So normally we don't change anything in designer.cs because that's written automatically by Visual Studio for us. So we can actually run this form right now, and we can put information in it. But our submit doesn't do anything, so we need to add an event handler. And one way to add an event handler is select the button, and over here we have properties and then we have events. If we click on events, we could double click in this space and put an event handler. We could also write our event handler and then just type the name of it in here. But generally speaking, the easiest way to create a event handler is to just double click on the control and it will create its default event handler, which in the case of a button is the click event, and it stubs it out. Note that sometimes you accidentally click on a control and you create an event handler for it. The easiest way to get rid of it in that case, if you didn't want one, is to go back to that control, find the event, find where the event handler is, delete it in there, and when you go back to your form you'll see that that extra event handler just went away. So now that I'm at my button submit click, what I want to do is instantiate a student fill student or set student properties from form, and then display toString in result text box. And the result text box is this one, which we need to set its name. I'm going to go back to properties, and I want that one to be txb result. So that's kind of a standard approach to create a form. You create a form, you get user input, you create an object to handle that input, you set properties in that object, and then that object, that class, will do all of the calculation and work for you. So let's create a student. That's my class over here. I'm going to just call it st for student. Equals new student, and I'm going to use there's multiple constructors we've made for this, and this 4-parameter constructor is probably the best one at this point, because we're going to have to do some work to get the radio button info, and it's probably easier to do it this way. So I'm going to, so the first element is the user ID, so I'm going to take, it looks like I misnamed my student ID field. This should be TXB, not TXT. So I'll fix that now so we're consistent. So I can actually take TXB student ID, and we're going to take the text property, which will get the text from that form that the user input. So in a text box, when they type in this text in this form, I can use the text property of that text box in order to find out what the user typed in. And then same thing with first name, and same thing with last name. And then I want the major. The problem is that major is in radio button, so I'm going to have to look through each of these and see what it is. And so to do that, I'm going to create a string to hold the results of that, and I'm going to default it to TBD in case the user doesn't input anything into that text box. And then I'm going to look at each of the radio buttons, or in case a user doesn't select a radio button, I'll leave it TBD. And so I can go through each one of these. And there's the checked property for a radio button indicates whether or not it's been selected. And it's a Boolean, so I can just check for that, and then if it is checked, then I'm going to say major equals the text property for the button. If not, then I'm going to check radio button programming, and if it's checked, then major is going to equal to programming.text. And so we can use an else ifs with radio buttons because we know only one can be selected. And so here we've already instantiated most of the properties for our student. We still have a few properties to get, which is really the scores and the classes. And so we'll do that down here. And so to do that, we'll need a couple of arrays. A string array for courses, and in order to do that we need to know how many courses have been selected. So before I can instantiate that, I'm going to have to check it. But since this is complex, the first thing I think I'm going to do is actually test the results, and I'm going to say textbox result.text is equal to st.toString. So even though we haven't set the scores and the courses yet, we can see if this part of our code works. Since this is relatively trivial, I can perhaps get some peace of mind by trying out my code. So probably I need to instantiate at least some scores as an empty score in order for this to be safe. By doing this, I create some empty arrays. Let's see if that works. And yes, that works. So by testing early, I was able to then find that if I don't have any scores, it creates an error. And here we can get an empty string for courses, so nothing gets displayed. And at least I get some safe results. And I also see that I have a little bit of a spacing problem here in my string, which I can fix. And so that intermediate test, by testing frequently, we can find little errors like that. So now I'm going to go through and find what's set here. And first I need to find how many courses were selected. And the easiest way to do that is set a counter, initialize it to 0, and then just check each checkbox. There may be a more elegant way of doing this. In actuality, normally when we would be doing something of this nature, we'd be pulling this information from a database. So most of this type of stuff would be done in the process of pulling it from the data. But since we're just doing a demo here where we're showing how to use the controls, this will do for now. So we'll create an array for courses and one for scores. And we'll use that count since now we know how many elements there are to initialize the arrays. Note that if a checkbox isn't checked and the user puts in a number, we won't include that number in scores. Now that we have those arrays declared, we need to fill them, and we can do that this way. We'll check their checked property, and if they are set, then we'll add them to the array. We're going to need an index. Again, we'll use the text property of the checkbox in order to set its value. And we're going to do a try parse on the score. And what we want to do is afterwards increment the index for the next checkbox. We'll do this 4 more times. Obviously at this point it would be better if there's some kind of array functionality used to do this, but this will be sufficient for now to demonstrate the process. So this goes through, and looks like our second checkbox may not be named appropriately. So now it's checked. Now that we have, and now we have 2 arrays set, one for scores and one for courses, and we're going to set our new arrays into student object. Now when we display this, we should see the student results. So I'm going to, and we have an error. Let's see where that is. So that should fix that one. Let's try it again. And we have our students. and we see everything came through. We got the average, which looks like there's a problem here because this should be 90. But we didn't hit the checkbox. That's why it doesn't show up. Now it's 90. So form seems to be working. So it's good to check what happens if you put nulls in it. And it doesn't seem to fail. Here it seems to fail. Unhandled exception. Divide by 0. So where would we have a divide by 0? It's probably in our student class. So scores.getLength we probably need to check here. So I'll check for 0, and if it's that first thing is going to divide by 0, I'll just make it 0. You can come up with whatever convention you want depending on the use case that you have. And now we don't get that error anymore. So that's the importance of testing, and also we've demonstrated how to create this form. Now suppose we wanted to do a few other things. We can use this opportunity to demonstrate how to create a link. Let's say I wanted a link to go to the Cengage website. Which is the manufacturer of or the publisher of the book. We can create a link button, and the link button actually doesn't have the functionality for creating a link. All we do is set the text property and the name. If I double click on it, I get a link clicked event, and then I need to actually write some code. And in order to do that, we use the system namespace diagnostics class process.start, the process class, calling the start method of the process class. So this allows us to start processes, and in our case we're going to start Internet Explorer. And we put in a URL here. And the nice thing, and that will cause the Internet Explorer to open, but we can also set link visited property to true, and it'll change the appearance of our button so it looks like it's been actually opened. So here, if I click on Visit Cengage, it opens up Internet Explorer and it goes to that site. And we can see that the appearance of our link changes as well. So let's say that we wanted to change this button with a better looking button. We can actually take a picture box around, we can actually make this into a button. A picture box basically allows us to use an image rather than the standard button. And one way I found to quickly make icons is to take something like PowerPoint and use some of its inherent capabilities. For example, its quick styles maybe to create a more interesting looking button. You have to be careful because you don't want it to be too big. So here I have a slightly better looking button, and you can play around with it, make it whatever you want, but then once you have this, you can right click and save as picture. And it'll save as a PNG. And now what we can do is, typically what I'll add a folder, call it images, and then add existing item, go to my desktop, find that button, now we have that submit button in our project. We take our button and then we can get our image here. If I then wire this up on the click event against button submit click and get rid of the original button, I have maybe a better looking button. And of course you can do a lot of things with images and place them around, set the background image in order to make your form look better, set the fonts and the appearance of everything and make your form actually look pretty good. So image buttons are kind of nice. And then the next thing we want to do is let's say that we wanted to set the student's campus. Well, we would need a property, so we're going to go to properties and we're going to add a property. We'll call it public string campus. So I'm setting an auto property. And probably probably I want to display that here. And back in my form, I'll need something to display that with. Well, I'll make a little bit of space here. And I'm going to insert a combo box for the campus. And the way we set we can set this is, first I'm going to set its property CBX campus, and then I'm going to set its there's an items collection here, and if I click on that ellipsis, it comes in and enters the name for the campus. So I can put in here on each line the name of each of the campuses that I want to have as a choice. And probably put a label in here so that we know what this is. And then in my form, in my button click event, I'm going to need to set that. So here I will just say st.campus, which is now available because I added it to the class. And in order to get at the selected item in a combo box, you just change it to toString and it'll take whatever text is being displayed. If I save that, Control F5 and run it, hit submit, we have an unhandled exception. Probably need to initialize that combo box somehow. In our constructor. Since they all go here, for now I'll just initialize it to an empty string, see if that fixes it. So that may not have been the issue. So I'm going to delete that change, go back in, and most likely it's because this control has not been initialized to something. So I'm just going to change its default value to TBD and see if that helps. We can see it works when we just click main, so most likely it's in our selected item. And that means that we need to check for that before we set it. So we can do that with an if-then. And what we're going to do is check if it is null. By doing this check, hopefully this will work. Let's see if that fixes it. Yes. So, and we can change this message in a combo box to something a little better. Rather than TBD, I'm going to say that gives us an opportunity to give some instructions. And it seems to be working okay. So now we've added a combo box. So this completes my demonstration of creating a form. We use some standard controls, we use some a little more advanced controls. We use a container to hold our radio buttons, so if we add any more radio buttons in the future, they won't conflict with each other. We added a combo box, we have some check boxes and some scores, and we have a text box which is made read-only with some vertical scroll bars, and a picture box to hold our submit button that looks a little better than the regular submit button. Thank you very much.